Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending another episode of Executive Talk. Those who are here live with us in our studio audience, and also those who are watching us live. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and paint a picture for you guys. I want to paint a picture. You going to work. What are you thinking about? You're probably thinking about the traffic, but you're also probably thinking about the project that you have due. You're probably already thinking about what time do you get off work. You're going through a lot of other things on your way and on your journey to work that you're not even considering a lot of other factors that happen within the workplace. And that's what we're going to talk about today as business owners. What things should you consider about your workplace that you're not paying attention to? For those that are watching on Facebook, for those that are watching on YouTube, really pay attention to this because this is serious business in this particular topic. I painted a picture that sounds very rosy, but at the other end, what are we not paying attention to? And today we're going to talk about workplace violence. How often does that happen? What is workplace violence? Have we seen it before but just never noticed? This is what we're going to talk about today. And in order to talk about this topic, somebody who has more experience than I do, we've invited Captain Mike Gross with us today. He is the captain of the Glendale Police Department to talk to us a little bit further about workplace violence and what it's all about. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Captain Mike Gross. How you doing, Mike? Thank you. Thanks for being here. So now, before we get into today's topic, just give us a little background on you. How long have you been part of the police force?
Just over 25 years.
Okay.
And been in every level of the agency, uniform patrol, investigations, everything you pretty much can do. And then about the last 5 years, been concentrating on this particular topic that we're dealing with.
I got you. So have you noticed, like in the last 5 years, there's been something that's, I don't know, just really prevalent within what's going on?
It is definitely really prevalent, unfortunately. It doesn't seem like we can go even a few weeks or a month without some type of a recorded workplace violence event. I think there's a number of factors for that, but this is a real part of our society today. It's just the way it is, and it's something that we certainly need to be prepared for.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and jump into it. And first of all, what is workplace violence? And by definition, it says workplace violence includes physical harming another, shoving, pushing, harassing, intimidating, coercing, brandishing weapons, or threatening, talking about, engaging in those activities. So talk to us a little bit further about, so that's the definition. What's your definition? Where do you go with that?
Well, number one, workplace violence is the largest threat to our personal safety in America today. The vast majority of these events happen in the workplace, and certainly your workplace violent event may look like this. It may be hair pulling and somebody throwing a stapler across the cube farm, but certainly the worst incident of workplace violence is the active shooter threat.
Okay.
And I know that these get a lot of media attention recently in the last few years, and that's probably about as bad as it can get. And it's really important for us to be sensitive to the topic and see what we can do, be a part of the solution instead of part of the problem, see what we can do to keep it from going that far.
Gotcha. I got you. So that is definitely an escalation event once it gets to the active shooter part, right?
Absolutely. The vast majority of the people who are involved in these active shooter events are people that work or have worked at that particular business. So they're people that they know you, they know the inside of the business. And there's a lot that can be done, I think, to prevent those things from happening. They have generally a long planning stage as opposed to somebody just walking in off the street. It's a real quick planning phase. Theirs is long, and there's plenty of waypoints along the way to intervene and do some prevention.
Gotcha. And so let's talk about that escalation. How many people have seen this movie? It's Office Space. All right. So for me, that's one of the funniest movies ever. So, I love Office Space, but this particular scene is the scene that stands out in this particular moment. I don't know if you guys remember, but it was Milton. He had the red stapler, and everybody disregarded him. And so explain to us this, because this happens to a lot of people, and they probably feel, just not heard from, and they're going through a process. So talk to us from your point of view as to how this escalates.
Well, and I agree. I think workplace violence or Office Space here is a great workplace violence movie. If you haven't seen it, you should see it from that perspective. And Milton and his red stapler They continue to move him around. They're going to have to move his, office. They're going to have to move him here. And actually, at the end of this scene, he says, okay, but I'm going to light the building on fire. So if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, there's a fire at the end. And it's important to realize that because the vast majority of these offenders, they broadcast their intentions. And a lot of times it's just that people are not paying attention or looking in the right place. 85% of them broadcast their intentions, and the vast majority of the time that is over social media. So if you're in the workplace and you're dealing with, somebody who might be having a hard time and they're starting to make comments like, it'd be so easy to get a gun in here, or, something like that, that's not something to just be disregarded or just, oh, that's just Maurice, talking around the water cooler.
I didn't really do it.
That's something to be sensitive to.
Sure.
and tell somebody. But oftentimes employees don't know, well, who do I tell? And I don't want to snitch on somebody or something. They're not sensitive to it. And so helping them with some good procedures and policies on how that works is usually the best way to go.
Absolutely. And one thing I liked about this, with Mike actually introducing this, is if you guys remember the movie, remember the escalation. He was the guy that was constantly, he had a need. And that need got disregarded, and he kept on getting pushed away. His office space got taken away, his cubicle, okay? That escalated over the term of the movie. And so at the end, obviously, he made a decision and took down the whole entire building. So that escalation is huge to how that happened. So we talked about an active shooter, and that's part of the escalation of workplace violence. And so by definition, an active shooter is defined by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security as an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined and populated area. In most cases, active shooters use firearms. So talk to us a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, it can be a lot of different, violent acts, but certainly the one we're most concerned with is the use of firearms. And, these people, again, 68% of those people are what we would call an insider. They're an employee or a former employee who has some type of issue, some type of a problem, and they are going to enact their violence in the workplace. So they already have keys or an access card, or they know the layout of the building, they know where people are going to be, and so moving into that arena, from hair pulling or throwing a stapler, that's a big jump, and it requires multi phases of planning on their part. And after hundreds and hundreds, unfortunately, hundreds of cases, we've been able to pick apart some of what they do and identify opportunities to do some prevention.
Sure. And we have a few examples of an active shooter here in Colorado. We had Chuck E. Cheese back in the day, back in '96 or whatever year that was. We had the Aurora Theater. Can you think of a couple of other instances that we can associate with?
Well, I mean, certainly there's Columbine.
Columbine,
that's right.
And
it wasn't a workplace violence event unless you're a teacher at that school, and then it is workplace violence. Yeah. And I think that it's important to recognize is that it's not just me and I go to work at my business and at the end of the day, 4 or 5 o'clock, I hit my time card and whew, I made it another day and now I'm safe. No matter where you go, you are in somebody's workplace. And maybe it's not your workplace, but you may end up in the middle of their workplace violence event. So, really for me, I think that they're not workplace skills, they're life skills. We need to have some basic understanding of how these things unfold so that we can survive those events the best that we can. We need to teach our kids, something happens while we're at the store, while we're at the mall. This is what we're going to do. They're really life skills,
yeah.
Unfortunately.
True. And, I like what you said about being in somebody else's workplace. Because it's very often that how many people go out to lunch at least once a week or whatever. Not talking about your spending habits. It's okay, do your thing. But, again, when you went out to lunch, you were in somebody else's workplace. And so am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. When you go to, this store or that store, or you go to the mall, that you're in somebody's workplace. Columbine High School, which was, really a watershed event for law enforcement and how we dealt with these types of events. For the teachers there, that was a workplace violence event for them. We don't think about it that way, but that's what it was. So, you know, and of course they're not just in Colorado. They're everywhere across the country and across the world, and you see them played out in different ways in other countries that don't have, you know, the access to firearms that we do here in the United States, where, you know, it's a knife attack, or they will rent a truck and they'll, you know, drive across a bridge or something like that. Whether that's terrorism or whether it's a workplace violence event, that can be worked out later. But unfortunately, these are a fact of our society, and they're here to stay.
That's it. And so that's what we wanted to paint the picture, to give this is the overall umbrella. It's very easy to get isolated in your own business and think, well, this is just me. It's when you become a consumer and go into somebody else's business, you're part of their business also. So it's very important to see the whole picture when we talk about workplace violence. So then you talk about what's an insider. So we have this picture of this older gentleman. Why is this relevant to our conversation today?
Well, I think it's relevant to the conversation today that the active shooter is nothing new. So, you know, when this gentleman, when his name is Pat Sherrill, and in the 60s in his workplace they called him Crazy Pat. Okay, so if you have somebody in your workplace that you have a Crazy Pat-ish nickname for, that's a problem. Okay, you should be. But many people where he worked survived that event because the day before he went on his spree, he went around to people and said, "Don't come to work tomorrow. Don't come to work tomorrow." And he picked and choose who he told. You know, you can come to work. And when Crazy Pat told you, "Don't come to work tomorrow," you didn't go to work. And so when he walked into the post office in Wichita, Kansas, and shot several people, they survived that. And this is where we get the term "going postal" from.
Oh, gotcha.
So that was just an active shooter, but we didn't categorize it. There was no Department of Homeland Security definition at the time. But everybody knew who Crazy Pat was. The police department knew. All of his coworkers knew. But they weren't sensitive to it. He broadcast his intentions. You know, we didn't have social media at the time. He couldn't put it out on Facebook, "Don't come to work tomorrow."
Right.
But he went around and told people, "Don't come to work." You know, the police department knew who he was. He used to mow his lawn in the middle of the night.
He really was crazy.
All of his neighbors knew. So this isn't a new topic. We look at it differently now. The availability of media drives a lot of that, but this is nothing new.
Gotcha. And I think we've all may have experienced maybe in prior workplace where we had that person and we weren't really for sure about, right? And it's like, oh, that guy, can't wait till I go home. I hope he leaves early. We probably had that uncomfortable feeling, you know, that happens. It's with us all the time. So who are they? So, you know, one of my favorite shows, again, is Criminal Minds. I love the profiling. So give us kind of this overall profile as to what it typically looks like.
Well, I don't advocate profiling, but I think it's important to understand who they are, because I think sometimes we have a tendency to build these people up in our mind as being a lot more than they are. You know, we can talk about that the vast majority of them are male. The vast majority of them are white. They are armed with a handgun. Why is that important? It's important because if you had somebody who was really intent on doing damage to a lot of people, they wouldn't bring a handgun. A handgun is relatively hard to shoot accurately. It doesn't carry much ammo, and anybody can learn easy techniques on how to defeat a handgun. They're operating alone. Again, if we were really trying to do some damage, there would be several of us. Even in the very, very few cases where there was two people, they stayed together. That's not really a tactic that somebody who knows what they are doing would use. 40% of them commit suicide. They have a plan, that plan doesn't work out, and they end up taking their own life. And these events are very short. So if you can even get through this just a couple of minutes, you have a high probability of surviving that. This is not the Navy SEALs coming to your workplace or Army Delta. That's not who these people are. And it is with some real basic training and techniques, the average person can overcome this and survive this threat. No problem.
Gotcha. And so it's interesting. You have an algorithm analysis, which I never heard of, but you have a couple of statistics here. You have 51% of attacks occurred in the workplace, 40% of the attackers committed suicide, 40% of the attackers were killed, 37 of the attacks were over in under 5 minutes. That's fairly quick.
Absolutely, and when you consider that the average response time, police response in the United States is 12 to 15 minutes, you know, what I tell people is, in this instance, you have to be your own first responder. Because, you know, there's a time of response, there's also what we call victim time. Something starts to happen, somebody has to say, I need to call 911. Then there's the call taker that takes the call and the dispatcher that sends the cars out. All that is happening. The police officers have to drive there, and then once we get there, our mission is not to save the people. Our mission is to stop the threat if it's still going on. And so really you have to be your own first responder if this threat comes to your workplace or is involved in your day. You've got to be able to handle that. You got to be able to get through those first few minutes.
Gotcha. I got you. So yeah, you did specify a specific timeline. And I think it's important to understand that from the time that they actually get the call and able to respond, there's probably about 10, 15 minutes gone, right?
Well,
right in there, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the national average is about 12 to 15 minutes for that process to go through.
Yeah. So that's pretty serious. That's pretty serious. And here's some more statistics here. We have 71% of attackers walked in, 74% of attackers entered through the front door, 68% of attackers were inside, and this one is really staggering. This 85% broadcast a perceived injustice. Earlier you were talking about social media and how we have access to that. Explain to us about this broadcasting.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of different cases. When we have one of these situations, the FBI comes in and they do an exhaustive background into the last several months or a year of this person's life, and oftentimes they find that they're broadcasting these injustices, or at least their perceived injustice, and they're usually broadcasting it on social media. There's been cases where a college student posted over 25 videos on YouTube, all talking about how angry he was with his fellow students, and the other students were watching them. And his last video said, tomorrow I'm going to go to this sorority and I'm going to do this. Well, he's posting all these things, but nobody's reporting it. A lot of what we're seeing now in the business world is a pre-termination background check. We all think about doing a background check before we hire somebody, but not before we fire them. And part of that should be somebody needs to look at their social media. What are they saying on social media? Did they just buy a new AR-15? Did they just get a divorce? Are they obviously having some problems? Is this going to be the straw that broke the camel's back? Maybe there's a way we can help this person with some employee assistance or something and intervene and help them and salvage them, then be the catalyst for that violent event.
Gotcha. So then, indicators of violence. I think one thing that one of our misconceptions is that these people just snapped all of a sudden. They woke up one day and just snapped. Is that correct, or is that totally?
No, they just don't snap. They broadcast these things in a number of different ways to their coworkers, on social media, to their family and their friends, and it's just a matter of being sensitive to it, and knowing what it is when you hear it or see it.
Gotcha. All right. So then let's talk about a couple of triggers, and you tell me which one makes the most sense. So firing or layoffs, complaints from coworkers, bad evaluations, unappreciative supervisors, being talked down to. How are these triggers just kind of create that scene for that person emotionally? So if, let's say you work for me, how am I creating a scene here to get things going?
Well, one of those things in a microscope or as a singular event probably isn't a big deal. We all get called into work on a Saturday or a Sunday, or we don't all have the absolute clarity from our supervisor about what they want us to do or what our goals are. Sure. And things like that. But the real issue becomes, if I work for you and I worked for you for a year and I come in 20 minutes late every day, just as an example, but me and you are good, I still do a good job while I'm here, and so you don't really make an issue of it. And then you get promoted or you leave or something happens, I move, and now I'm working for Supervisor B. And Supervisor B comes to me and says, hey, Mike, you've been late, 20 minutes late, like every day this week. I'm going to have to write you up. You got to get here early. There's a lot of people out there. We would like all of our employees to go, you know what, Supervisor B is right, and I should be better, and I should get here on time, and I'm going to change my behavior. But that doesn't always happen, and a lot of times they say, man, Supervisor B doesn't like me. I've been working for Maurice for a year. He never brought it up. He never had a problem with it. And then for me, that is a perceived injustice. I'm not being treated correctly. Call it what you will. But that is where it starts. And that's where it's really important from the employer side of this equation to have consistent policies and procedures and really work on your supervisors to make sure that they are using those consistently. And that's a lot of prevention to get away from this perceived injustice. Some workplaces might have, a favorite son or favorite sons where they can pretty much get away with anything, but the rest of us, if we do anything, we're getting, written up every minute.
Right.
That's a problem, and really it's important to be consistent. If employee A and employee B both do the same thing, they both get disciplined equally, then it's not a problem. It's not that injustice. It doesn't allow that feeling of victimization to kind of grow in that employee.
That's it. And the progression of the attacker, if we look at what you just said, the perceived injustice, it didn't take much for him to get into that place of being perceived in that injustice. So that's about how quick it can start. It can start to fester over time. Okay? Again, think about Milton. He had perceived injustice. It didn't take much for it to graduate and get more. So as a business owner, how do I start preventative maintenance? What is pre-planning for a business owner?
Well, really, I think you should kind of look from a macro view, and then work it all the way down to the micro, the individual employee.
Sure.
Do I have policies and procedures? What are they, and are they effective? Are they complete? Are they comprehensive? And am I working with my HR, department? If I have an HR department, but a lot of small businesses, you're the boss and you're the accountant and you're the HR department. So,
right.
What am I doing? And do I have these things? Does everybody know what they are? Do people know what their path is if they begin to see this type of behavior? Have I documented that I've trained? Have I trained my employees? Have I documented that I've trained them on what to do? Again, a lot of litigations coming out now from survivors of these events who are suing their employer for not having a plan, not having a policy, and they didn't know what to do. And so maybe they were injured, maybe they weren't, but anybody attached to one of these is going to be affected. And they sue their employer generally under a legal term called deliberate indifference. And that basically works out to you knew or should have known that there was an issue and you didn't do anything about it. Well, as many events that there has been in the United States, I don't know what employer can really say, well, I didn't know that I was going to have a problem. It's across all industries. So, it's really important to start big, get your policies, get work down, train your employees what to do, document that you trained them. Don't forget to get the new person that you hire. And, that pretty much equals a real comprehensive, plan at that point.
Gotcha. So what would you tell a business owner? Because, for a business owner as well, this can affect the business owner's overall brand. Let's say an incident does happen at your workplace. How do you, there's got to be some kind of recovery plan to get back and, keep your business open.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, plan for that now. Don't try to plan while you are in the midst of an emergency or just after you had an emergency.
Right.
Plan for that now. How are we going to handle this? How are we going to speak to the media? How are we going to protect our brand? How are we going to get our employees that survive this event some help afterwards? Because they're going to need a little bit of help, or at least should be offered some help.
Sure.
But you're absolutely right. You brought Chuck E. Cheese earlier. Chuck E. Cheese never reopened.
That's right.
some of these businesses have been, they just leveled them to the ground. Nobody was ever going to walk back in that building again. It was too much of an emotional event for the community. And so, you got to have a recovery plan. How are we going to get the doors back open? How are we going to do this? How are we going to recover? And the time to do that is not when you're, there's crime scene tape up around your building.
That's right. That's right. So, Mike, with all the business owners that are watching, all the business owners that are here in the studio audience, what would you leave them with? What is their next step? What do you want them to do and understand?
I think you have to understand that you have to be sensitive to the issue. It's not something that you can ignore. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be a big, grand plan. But you really need to do something, and you owe it to your employees. You owe it to your business and your business's future. This should be a component of your overall business plan and continuity of operations.
Gotcha. I want to add to that. One thing that's indicative of business is between employer and employee is the dollar bill. The dollar bill can have you skip over a lot of things because you're in the rat race. You're trying to increase revenues for the next year. You're trying to get a project done by the end of the month. You're in the rat race. And how much time do you have to actually see these injustices? You know how people become closed off when they start having pain. Well, no, I'm good. I'm all right. There's a communication right there that you just say, you know what? Whatever. We got to make this money. We're going to keep pushing forward. So there's moments in time in our businesses that we need to actually come back. And is there something within our companies that's set up to actually speak to our employees individually? Maybe once a month you sit down, hey, how are things going? Is there something I can help you with? What can we do to actually help support your goals and where you're trying to go? Because minimizing through communication can actually open up those doors and maybe shut down some perceived justices. It doesn't take much for people to feel lonely, isolated, and undervalued. It doesn't take much. A lot of us got out of a company that we work for because we felt those things and started our own companies. So this is our opportunity to give back, and it should be part of our business models to communicate with our employees to make sure that these injustices are not flourishing within our office space. I want to welcome everybody to continue this conversation. Please share it with your friends. This is great information. Thank you so much, Captain Mike, for everything that you do and protecting us and keeping us safe. Those that are here on Facebook, LinkedIn, and also YouTube, thank you for joining us. But in the meantime, Mike and I, we have to actually get back to work. You guys have a great day. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate everything.